All right, Andrew. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Thanks for hanging out with me. And we're going to go over some more nuggets. I think we're calling them golden nuggets because we're doing some. I'm going to explain a little bit more about behind the scenes things and with your experience. But this time we're going to be focusing on how you assembled the team to help put your film together, and also when you're shooting the film, what kind of things you encountered. And so the first part that I wanted to ask you, the first major nugget is embracing adversity. And
Hmm.
within that, you could just talk about these different subtopics of how you dealt with the shit and got past it, any adversity or roadblocks that you encountered that were blessings in disguise, how you're able to focus on immediate issues to avoid feeling overwhelmed, and also what you did to work the problem through to completion.
Well, first of all, in general, there was a lot of uh, why am I blanking? Adversity?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, there was a lot of adversity in like every single week that we were in production. Some of it was related to cast. Some of it was like location. One of the things I remember, probably the one of the most stressful experiences was the first full day of shooting down in Toronto Pinnacles. Um, the DP, Steven, he was going out to get the sunrise footage, and then the rest. And I was supposed to go with the rest of the crew to set up the location for our first, scene of the day. And while he was up there, we are supposed to scout a location and start setting up the equipment. And I had our stunt guy who's driving us around. I told him to turn around and to go down a different direction. But then we got stuck in just like a pit of sand. And so what we ended up doing was we had to get out of the van and like schlep all the equipment over to the spot that I picked out. And then when Steven came, we just had to start shooting, and we were starting to get further and further behind. And because of it's a national park, and we had a permit, but you have to only drive on the permitted paths. And so I wasn't sure, since we had turned around and we were kind of like slightly off the road, whether like we might get fined by the ranger. And we knew the ranger was coming, like in a couple hours they would come by to check on us. And so I was kind of panicking a little bit because we had to get set up for the shot, get going on that, but also like figure out how to dig the van out. And then like, we might get fined by the ranger and all that. So it was just kind of like, how do you get through all of this? Like it's like the first shot of the day. How do we how do we like deal with all these problems, right? But you just have to focus on what you can do, like every little problem that you can solve. So we just had to like everyone carry equipment over to where we were getting set up. Darren, who was driving the van, like started working on trying to dig it out while we were setting up the equipment. And then like while we were shooting, like in between shots, like he needed Darren needed someone to help drive the Jeep, the other Jeep that we rented, to help kind of pull out the van and stuff. And just like everyone's working on their little piece of the problem, and somehow we got through it. Like he was able to pull out the van, and then of course just a few minutes later the ranger came and everything was okay. And while we were shooting, even though we were getting further behind in the schedule, we realized that actually, instead of taking all the shots from different angles, that we had this one shot that was great. It was sort of the camera moving up from the gun to then see the body kind of in the background. And so instead of having multiple shots, I decided to do that scene as just like a one continuous take. And then we just did multiple takes of that. And so we ended up like catching up, and I liked the way that scene turned out. I much prefer it over like having a lot of different shots that we cut between. And it was like the most stressful, I think, experience of the whole production, but we were able to get through it because everyone worked together and they like focused on their piece of the problem, and like things just kind of came together and we were able to get through that.
So if everyone focusing on a piece of the problem also helped make it less overwhelming, you didn't have to tackle the whole thing as one person, right?
Exactly, because no one person has to solve all of the problems. It was like
Okay.
Darren was focused on getting the you know the van out, and you know I was focused on like you know getting the you know the shot up and running, and you know and other people were kind of like shuttling between the two things, and just whenever there was like a spare moment, they would kind of run off and go work on one of the other problems, and so like you know I just didn't have to worry about like every single detail about getting every problem solved. You know, it was like I knew people were working on it, and so that gave me, you know, that made me feel more secure because I didn't have to like stop production to get all this stuff done.
Hmm. I mean, given the fact that you ran into these problems, I mean, how were you able to think about it where I know you kind of said there's some benefits to it, but I mean, in the moment, it's kind of like, oh my God, why is this happening to me? I don't want this to happen. How do you get to the point where you can look at it as more of a blessing, though, versus just being all negative about the adversity you're dealing with?
Sometimes you can't until after it's over, you know, because another
Okay.
issue we ran into was in one of the scenes, I was supposed to have a vulture, you know, it's supposed to represent death. It
Yeah.
had a lot of things in the script, but we could not get a hold of, you know, a prop vulture. And so like we tried and tried, like Darren tried finding like, you know, something similar that we can, you know, dress up and like call prop houses, like just, we tried everything. And then when it came down to it, like, you know, the night before, we just didn't have it. So I had to make the decision to just cut that from the scene and then rework the scene without it at all. And so at the time, like, man, I was just so like down about it because it was, since I wrote it, it was a very symbolic thing in the script for me, you know. But then when it took me, you know, almost a full day to sort of mourn it, and then just like let go of needing to have the vulture. And then once I decided, you know, then I was able to move on and say like, okay, instead of the vulture, we're gonna do, you know, 2 missed shots and then like one hit. And I think it actually turned out better. But I didn't get that perspective until like after we were done filming, probably not even till after we got back from Trona Pinnacles. But you know, it just takes some time to get some perspective. But I think when I look back, a lot of those things that happened actually made the film better.
Hmm. So it's kind of like you might at the time, the moment the crap is happening, or it's not happening the way you wanted it to happen. It's almost like you have to kind of trust that it's going to be okay, even though you don't really like it the way it's going at this moment. That maybe later on, the benefit of it of what's going on will reveal itself, or you have to be creative to make it work, kind of thing.
Yeah, like you sort of have to go with the flow. I mean, one of the things I learned from improv was kind of, um, you know, just sort of trusting in the spontaneity of the moment and like that things will turn out better, even if you have to kind of change or pivot. You know, because if you try to control things too much and have expectations for exactly what it has to be, I mean, when you run into these difficulties, inevitably you're going to have to change and like adapt to it. And so it's never going to be exactly what you imagine. But the good thing is that also opens up the possibility for things to be better than you had imagined because you can't necessarily you know contemplate all the possibilities.
Hmm. Is there anything else you want to talk about with regard to embracing adversity that you want to share with anybody?
um I don't know, I think it's a little bit like one time I went to I think Bikram yoga, right? I don't really like hot or like humid sort of settings, but it was like painful like while I was doing it, like I felt like I was gonna die, but then when it was over it was such like a relief, like I felt so good. Like it's strange. It's like while you're doing it, it's like the most difficult thing in the world. But like when it's done, it's like you get this feeling of uh, uh well, let me start over. It's like listening to Woody also.
Oh, that was Teddy.
Oh,
Oh,
Teddy.
is it that loud? Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
can hear the growl.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
I cut that out. Nope. Leave it. Okay.
Okay, and I was trying to search for a word. Okay, now I remember. Okay. Um So it sort of makes me think of like when I tried Bikram yoga one time. You know, it's the type of yoga where they make the room really hot and it becomes humid, and that's you know, really uncomfortable for me. And so when I was doing it, it felt so excruciatingly difficult and like I was gonna die. But once it was over, there's this release, and I just felt really great. And I think going through these, you know, the adversity and the challenges is kind of like that. Like while you're doing it, you feel like, oh my God, like how am I going to get through this? But when you're done, it's such a relief, and it's I don't know, maybe it's kind of like you know, endorphins or something, but it's like you feel the contrast is amazing. Like you feel great from being able to have accomplished it and get, you know, gotten through it.
Okay, cool. I'm also going to start muting my side when you start talking in case there's any weird noises that come from my end.
Okay,
All right, are we done with embrace adversity then?
I think so.
Okay, so the next one is be vulnerable. And if you have any, whether it's putting your team together or when you're shooting, talk about how you're able to be creative and open, allowing yourself to be changed by the experience, understand that control is futile or just pretty much letting go, and then also acknowledging the feelings of being an imposter.
Oh, that's a
You don't
lot of
need to
stuff.
you don't need to cover all of it. I think it's just whatever I think from this segment that you think is important to highlight is probably is better.
Well, when you bring up vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
It makes me think of like when I was showing early cuts to people, because you know, at that stage, even, you know, while you're editing, you don't have like all the sound design in there, the music, you know, the visual effects. So it's just there's a huge gap between kind of the raw state that it's in and the final state that you hope to get it in. So when you show people, like to me, that was the most vulnerable like moment or moments that I had to experience, because you're sitting next to someone and they're watching like what you've made, and it's like, and you know it's not reflective of the end product because it doesn't have all the stuff in it. And so like
Mm-hmm.
watching it without any music and stuff, you're like, oh, this feels so like raw and kind of crappy, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, being able to, you know, still listen to people and take their feedback and try to figure out like, you know, are you missing anything in the edit? Like, is you know, are you getting across the things that you're trying to? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's, you know, that's the important thing. And the other way we dealt with it a little bit was to add some, because you kind of, it's sort of like a sketch when you're doing the editing process. You're kind of roughing it out, and so we put in some temporary like you know, sound effects in some places and some temporary music a little bit, and you know, we would put in some notes. We'd like, oh, this is where we're going to put in the eye glow or something like that, so people would at least understand that this is, you know, what was going to happen, even though we don't have the visual effects yet. But yeah, like just sitting there and watching your film when while with other people who are watching it, that's probably the hardest thing, because even when it's done and, you know, we'll be watching it in a theater, like it's, you know, it's going to be nerve-wracking to watch it and then just wait to see what people think of it.
Yeah, because it's kind of like the inner critic, the gremlin voice is just like very, very loud when you're exposing your work to other people because you're worried about what they're going to think or say about it.
Well,
That's
also because, you know, I've gone over the footage like a million times when we were editing, you know, the editor and I and the producer and stuff. We've seen every frame like a million times, and we've seen it like you know, reshuffled in a billion different combinations. So we know all the, you know, like mistakes or errors or like little things like that. And most people, you know, they're just following the action on the screen, so they may not see the little details. So it's like your inner critic is even louder because you know all the little imperfections in every piece of the footage. Um,
Mhm.
so that's partly why, you know, the inner critic can be so loud.
I see. Well, I mean, you talked that's just from the editing standpoint. I mean, if there's any examples from when you're actually where they're getting the team together to shoot the film, or when you're actually shooting the film from the standpoint of being vulnerable, being creative and open, or being changed by experience, letting go of control, or the imposter stuff.
Um, yeah, like I remember one of the days we were shooting the shootout scene down in
Mhm.
Hollister, and the scene was just not going the way I guess, not the way that I had planned it out with the DP. And so we needed to sort of like stop and regroup because like, we just weren't following the plan that I discussed with the DP. So he was just kind of like, um, was trying to understand what I wanted. And so, especially being a new director and like trying to figure things out on the fly, it's really hard, especially on set. Like, um, to you and you sometimes need to just take a moment, and like we stopped, and like he and I went and we talked, and we kind of discussed how we were going to proceed forward, and we just kind of like threw out the plan that we had assembled before we shot. Because once you do that, then instead of people's expectations being lined up with the old plan that's not working, like if you can stop and talk it through and figure it out together, then then you can move forward and things will work out. But it's kind of vulnerable because you know that like things aren't going according to your original plan, and it's kind of like sometimes it feels a little embarrassing in front of other people, right? Because you're like, this is what we're supposed to do, but then it's just not going that way at all, and you have to kind of pivot in front of people.
Okay. All right. So the question I have is, how did you create an atmosphere where it was safe to pivot like that, to where it's okay to be embarrassed and mess up like that, and still be able to change? Because you could also be like a hard ass or arrogant or prideful, where you say, "I'm gonna do it my way anyways. I don't care," because you're too afraid to be embarrassed to make a change like that, to humble yourself.
Well, I mean, I wish I could say like, I knew how to create an environment like that, but in truth, it's just sort of the necessity of it. Like there is no time to go off and be like, okay, let's all take five and like, kind of run off and, kind of figure stuff out, and you can't just continue to push through something that's not working. Like that will just, guarantee failure. If it's not working, you've tried it 2 or 3 times, you have to change. Otherwise, you're just going to run out of time while you're shooting. So you have to, I mean, and so we just had to like stop and like talk for a couple minutes in front of everyone and just like, figure it out, and then get to shooting again.
Well, that sounds to me like it's really more about bravery or courage to say, to be able to say, let's take a pause, and to be able to model that behavior in front of other people, right? That it's okay to do this. It's okay to like stop and then regroup and then change the plan and do something different, to adapt pretty much.
Yeah. And I was really lucky because, I can't take credit for all that because Steven, my DP, was actually the one that said to me, we need to pause for a second and like kind of regroup and like figure out a new game plan going forward so that we're both on the same page. So I
Mhm.
really relied on his experience, to to get through that, and like to then understand, oh, we can't just keep trying to push through this. We need to stop and like kind of regroup and figure it out. And then once we went through that a couple of times, then I understood that, oh, it's okay to do that, and that's part of the process. And it made the shooting a lot easier down the line.
Oh, but since you're the leader, right, the director, pretty much the head of this, some ways you also had to allow that, like to have how pretty much allow Steven to exhibit his leadership, right, and to redirect things.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you could have just said, "Screw you, I don't agree with you." You actually deferred or to his expertise.
Yeah, because part of being the director is knowing when to follow other people. Um,
Okay.
because Steven has a lot of experience. He's been doing this for a long time. So like there
Okay.
were definitely moments where I knew like I should, just like let him like lead us. Because
Okay.
there was other there's another time it comes to mind, like we were shooting like at the hanging tree, the scene with Krug and Joe, and he was trying to work with, you know, with the other actor, and they kind of had to work through their scene, and like but I was getting pressure that we needed to shoot because we were running out of time, but I knew that it would turn out better if I gave them just a few more moments to kind of work it out, like the acting part of it. And so like you have to, everyone is like, you know, demanding your kind of attention and trying to tell you like, you know, you're out of time, this and that, but you have to kind of sometimes take a step back and like think about what's important and then make room for it, even though, you know, you're constantly under time pressure.
Okay. Yeah, this pausing stuff seems to be very, very important. In order to do things the right ways, you really need to take a pause.
Yeah, because pausing for a couple minutes may actually save you a lot more time down the line. Because if you just keep trying and, you know, just kind of like, you know, at full steam, like it's not going to turn out necessarily well, and you may end up wasting a lot of time because it's not working correctly. But if you stop and then rethink things and you know, find a different way that does work better, it will actually save you time in the long run.
So, any of these experiences you talk about, can that be related to any time where you might have felt like being an imposter at all, or does that not really come into play for this time period of the shooting the
No, it
film?
definitely does, because you know, being a new director, you're on set. Everyone, like the protocol is like, you know, the director is the leader and like they call the shots. And so everyone's looking to you to make decisions and like know what's best and all this and that. And sometimes you have to, I don't know, it makes me think of this episode in Star Trek Next Generation where Picard and the doctor are like stuck on a planet and they have this mental connection, right? And they get to this, like they have to decide whether to go like left or right. And then Captain Picard just says, okay, let's go right. And then the doctor stops him and is like, you actually don't know which way we should go. You just sort of arbitrarily made a decision. And he was like, yeah, like sometimes as a captain, like you have to do that because you're in charge and you're in command, but like it's not clear which way to go. And it's so I mean, what I always take from that is that not that you should like be a fake leader, but sometimes like making a choice and moving forward is the important thing to do, because if you once you make that choice and then if it turns out that it's not right, you can always change and then kind of like, you know, pivot or, you know, address it or like fix it down the road. But if you stop and don't make any choice, then that paralyzes you. You can't make any forward progress. So I think, you know, I ran into a few situations where like, you know, I was given several choices and they all seemed pretty good, you know, like, well, why is one better than the other? So I just went with my, you know, gut or my instincts or my intuition, or sometimes just like made an arbitrary choice, because then sometimes it would be like, well, but then if you choose that, then these are your, you know, the trade-offs or the consequences. And then I was able to be like, oh, okay, well, no, then maybe we should do something else. But I think just making the choice is important so that you can move forward.
Sounds like once you make the choice, you also have to be creative and open to whatever comes from that choice, so you can pause or pivot or do whatever you need to do. So there really isn't really a bad choice. It's just a choice, and you just kind of
Right.
work through that.
Right. And also not all choices are permanent,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So just because you say, okay, let's try it this way, you know, if it turns out like that's not going to work, you can change. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you can't do it too many times, otherwise you're not getting any progress done either. But you know, don't feel like every choice has to be perfect.
Okay. Anything else you want to talk about with regard to being vulnerable? And this part of the like either shooting it or actually assembling the team. I mean, assembling the team, you talked and the other two nuggets that we're going to cover is get 110% of yourself, connect with others. So if this is more relevant in some of those two categories, it's fine. But I remember you talking about when you were casting, and sometimes it just didn't work out with some of the members or people that were part of your crew. This didn't work out. And I don't know if it's vulnerability comes into play in terms of when you had to make a change, or is it more with connecting others where you had to resolve conflict or something, do something with that nugget? I'm not quite sure what's more relevant.
I don't know. When you say vulnerability, what comes to mind is, after I wrote the initial version of the script, I took it to the writers group.
Uh-huh.
And I remember, like, before we started doing the table read, table read is where, you pick people to read the different parts and then someone to read like the scene direction, stuff like that. And then you go through it, acting, so you can kind of hear it for real and see if everything works. So before we actually started, I remember, like, literally I was thinking, like, oh my God, this may be total crap. Like, I don't know what they're going to think of it. Like, they may just think it sucks completely. And then we did the table read, and then there's like kind of like the question and feedback part of it. And yeah, some people didn't quite get it, and it was the first version, but then some people did get it, and I still got a lot of good feedback, and a lot of people ended up liking it, and they said it was really good for our first draft. So that was really encouraging. But like, the moment before we actually started, it was like, if it could be a total train wreck. I don't know what other people think of my stuff. I know what I think about my stuff, but who knows how everyone else perceives it.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be the same when we actually show the film, the final version.
How about when you were shooting the film or putting people together as part of your crew? Did you have any kind of, oh, this could be terrible crap moments at all?
Not that I can think of, not like that.
Okay, that's fine.
Because a lot of the people I'd worked with before, like in terms of like the crew and stuff, um, so I mean that all felt fine.
Okay. Anything else you want to mention about vulnerability? Otherwise, we'll just move on.
Uh, Not that I can think of right now.
Okay, so then we're gonna go to, do you need a break or anything? Water?
Nah, I'm getting hungry, so I think I'd rather just power through this and then I can go eat dinner.
Okay, we'll try and make it quick. The next part is give 110% of yourself. So, in this time period of getting your crew together, your team together, shooting the film, how were you? What kind of things happened where you had to focus on listening to yourself, or had the courage to be your authentic self and follow your passion, do everything in your power to make the things happen, or you wanted to quit right before you succeeded?
God, that's a lot of stuff.
Or just focus on a couple. You don't have to do all of them, just a
Can you
few.
repeat them again?
You wanted to quit right before you succeeded. You try to do everything in your power to at least make something happen or make it possible. And the courage to be your authentic self and follow your passion. And you listen to yourself.
For that last one, I would say during the editing process, because you can cut the film like a million different ways, right? And you can move around the scenes. It doesn't have to be the way that you wrote it originally. And a lot of times, they say like, the movie is made like 3 times: when you write it, when you shoot it, and when you edit it. So when we were going through the editing process, part of it is trying to like see if there's a better way to, show the film, to present it in different order than what you wrote. But we tried a bunch of different combinations, and they just weren't working for me. And like, at some point I had to go back to what my original vision was. And I had to sort of stand up for it because there was a lot of differing opinions of like, how we should do the edit. But it was just the more that we did it, the further away it was getting from like the feel that I wanted. So I had to sort of have the courage to be like, no, this is what I want, you know?
Okay. And you were able to get them to agree with you?
Well, they didn't necessarily agree, but like I am the director and this is my project, so you have to listen to their input and consider it, but you don't always have to accept their recommendations.
Right. I mean, how is that related though to you want to quit right before you succeed? How how did what you
Oh,
just told me do that?
uh, I don't know how that's related to that exactly.
Or let's it's more related to you have to do everything in your power to make something possible. Or it's not actually, maybe it's more encouraged to be your authentic self and follow your passion. I think that's what it was because you stood up for what
Yeah,
you believe was
yeah,
the
that was the
original.
last.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, because I didn't say anything yet about like, wanting to quit before you succeed.
Okay. That's what it is I'm just reading it in reverse order. So what you say is last to me is like first on my
Oh,
list. I'm
oh.
confusing myself, that's all. It's not your fault, it's my fault. Okay.
Well, yeah, so for wanting to quit right before you succeed. For me, those moments are probably like when you're at a standstill. Like when we were doing the edit, right? Like there was a point where when I showed people like the rough cut, like no one got it at all. Like they're like, I don't understand what's going on. And it was really frustrating and I wasn't sure what the problem was or how to fix it. And at that time it was like, man, how am I even going to make a film with this stuff? I felt like, yeah, I mean, you sort of feel like stopping. I mean, you can't really stop, but you feel like, man, like how am I going to move forward at all? Um, but you take baby steps and you kind of work through it. Like what I ended up doing was, it's because what I realized was what I was doing was sending out a link to people and they watched the film and then they kind of answered my questions through email. But I had no idea in terms of like the circumstances that they're watching it. Like, was it just like, on their phone? Was it too small? Like, were they watching it while they're doing something else so they weren't paying attention? So there were a lot of these variables so that I didn't know, based on the way I was doing it. So what I did instead was I started to show it to people like with me being present. And so they would watch it once and then I would ask them questions about it and then I can kind of like, figure out more how they're perceiving that as they're watching it. And that helped a lot in terms of figuring out what was wrong and then that led to me figuring out like how to fix it. Um, but you may run into several of those moments where it's just like it's just not clear what's wrong or how to fix it or how to move forward. And you may want to stop and give up, but you can't. You have to keep moving forward. You have to, but what you can do is pause. Like you can be like, okay, this moment I can't figure it out. I can take a break, take a couple hours or take a day or whatever, and then think about it and like review kind of what you've done, and then think about like ways you can change.
Did you run into this type of you want to quit but right before you succeed? And wasn't there when you're shooting the film, like you had to do some extra footage or something about there's something about day 8 and you really had no other opportunity to shoot it and you had to shoot it on that one day and something about maybe the weather wasn't really good or
Oh, yeah. So when we were shooting at the hanging tree scene, like we were supposed to get that scene done in a day, but we went long and like we weren't able to get all the shots. So when we tried to go back the following weekend to shoot it, like the weather just wasn't cooperating. It was totally overcast like the whole day. There was literally only maybe like 15 minutes of sunlight, when we were waiting there the whole time, and it just wasn't going to match up. Like none of the shots would match, and it was not usable. So we had to sort of like call it and say like, we're not going to be able to shoot today. But when we made the decision, it was not clear that we could come back a third time and shoot it again or not. And it was just like, what can you do when you're up against the weather? It's not something you can control. And so it's just like, and it was, was a critical scene. So it's not like you could just stop and not do without it. You just had to just sort of have to press on. I mean, another thing like that happened when we were down in Toronto Pinnacles. Like, we needed to shoot a third day down there on Sunday, and so some of the crew had to return already. But like, most of us were able to stay, and we were shooting, and we were doing, we were making pretty good progress. We were getting all the shots in. We were pretty quick and efficient, and we were like, oh yeah, we're gonna make this. This is gonna be awesome. Like, we're gonna get done, and we're gonna get all our shots. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the storm front moves in, like all the clouds start blocking the sun, and it looks like it's gonna rain. Like in the distance, we can see some rain going on, and we're still missing, like 3 or 4 shots. And it was like, what are we gonna do? Because if we leave, then we just won't have what we need. And then also if we leave and then the weather switches back and it's good again, then I'd be kicking myself forever because like I just didn't like tough it out. So what we ended up doing was just packing up the equipment so that it wouldn't get wet if it did rain. But we were just like sat in our cars for, it was a good 45 minutes to an hour, and luckily the clouds passed through and it didn't rain, and it returned to the sunshine that we had previously, and we were able to finish shooting. But I mean, that was this really scary moment because it was like, even though we were so close to finishing all of our shots, if the weather didn't cooperate, that might have wrecked all of the, that part of the film where we needed those shots.
At the same time, you didn't give up, and then it was also somewhat luck, right? Because you stayed with it, right?
Yeah, but there's nothing that says that it would have gone our way. It's like you have to do the thing that at least aligns you with the potential outcome that you want, right? Because if we had given up and gone home and the weather like flipped again, then if we had just given up and like left and not even given it the chance, and then the weather did change, then we would have thrown away our chance, and we wouldn't have any way to get it. But at least by staying there, you keep that door open to that possibility. I mean, it's still possible that the weather wouldn't have cooperated with us, but if there's a chance that it will, then you have to do the actions that align you with that with that possibility. And it was tough because it was like we had worked so hard, and it's like, and then it could have all gone away in an instant, and it's like sometimes you want to like just throw up your hands and be like, I give up, but you can't. You just have to keep going.
I'm assuming if it hadn't worked out that way, then you guys would have figured out something else potentially. It just wouldn't have been what you thought it was going to be. But I guess you didn't have to worry about that because it worked out anyways. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but that was luck, though. I mean,
but sometimes it is luck because you just have to be at the right place at the right time. But you have to put yourself in the right place.
You have to be persistent enough for luck to be on your side at some point.
Okay.
Because at some point, luck will turn your way.
Okay. Okay. Anything else you want to talk about with regard to giving 110% of yourself? With regard to like assembling your team or shooting the film?
Uh, 110%. I mean, you just have to be willing to do whatever it takes. Like when I was talking to people and recruiting, the crew and stuff like that. I live down, in San Jose, which is like an hour drive from San Francisco, but I was willing to meet up with people because most people lived up there. So you just have to be willing to go out of your way to do it, because if you aren't willing to do that, then why should anyone else?
Hmm. Okay, got it. All right. So are we ready to go on to the last one, connect with others?
Uh, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So this one, wait, you okay, or do you want to say
Yeah,
something?
no, no, I was gonna ask, like, so for connecting with others, like, what was the purpose
The
of that?
four sub, yeah, four sub points were how you're able to listen to different viewpoints, resolving conflict through open communication. You might need a third party to facilitate. Be willing to ask for help. Take advantage of your team. So it's pretty much how do you connect with others to make something happen, or how do you connect with others?
Oh, well, when you put it like that. So I think connecting with others also helps create opportunities, because during the
Okay.
pre-production process, we were looking for locations, and people would give suggestions and we would check them out. But initially, actually, none of them panned out because a lot of them were like tourist attractions, and they had like pavement, asphalt, street lights, lots of modern day things that you would ignore as a tourist. But when you're shooting it, you can't ignore those because those are like in the shot. Um, but I just continued to talk to people, and people would give suggestions like, well, why don't you try talking to this person, or what about like in this area, or I heard this or that. And so one of them was like, I heard there might be a place down in Hollister. And so that was like all the information I had. There was no name of a specific place or whatever. There was just like Hollister. So I started doing some searches, through Google and stuff, and it turned out there was, a private ranch that had a Western town built in it, and that's what we ended up using. And I'm
Wow.
not even sure that was like the lead that he intended to give me, but through just like talking and like what people came up with and what doing the search, I like just bumped into it. And so
Nice.
making those connections with people like make these things happen, because you don't always know like what's available, because it'd be like, well, how are you going to find a Western town? Um, who would ever thought like there was one that was built on a private ranch? I wouldn't have thought that was even a possibility, but it exists, and you can find out about it because people spread this information between each other, like kind of through a chain. So that's why networking is so important, because things that you couldn't even conceive of that exist do, and the only way to find out is through other people.
Hmm. It's once again it shows that you don't have to do this by yourself. That once you open yourself up to asking for help, you go out and seek it, you'll get the resources or the help that you're looking for.
Right.
All right. What about any other stories or examples of resolving conflict through open communication, where you might need a third party to help facilitate that conflict, or taking advantage of your team's expertise?
Well, a few different times I've actually had to replace people or let them go, and
Okay.
it's never an easy decision, and it's never an easy conversation when you have it with them.
Uh-huh.
Like at one point I had to replace the lead actor, um, and the guy I initially cast, like he's a great person, and like he put in all the effort into it and everything like that. It just wasn't kind of lining up with um, what I needed for the crew character. And so having to make the decision that to replace him was difficult. But then I was kind of terrified to go and have the conversation with him to let him know. But I told him I wanted to meet up with him and sort of talk to him and stuff like that. And so I met with him, and when I actually told him and stuff, and I was just as honest and frank as I could be, like although he was disappointed, obviously, like it turned out okay, you know. So and it turned out better than I thought it was, because in my mind it was going to be like a complete train wreck, you know, and that he was going to be really upset and stuff. And you know, obviously he wasn't happy about it. He was disappointed and stuff, but like he understood, you know, that I was trying to do the best thing for the film, and so you know, it was it turned out okay. And I
Okay.
think that was the surprising thing to me. It was like in my mind it was going to be like this horrible conversation, and it wasn't an easy conversation, but it didn't end like in the horrible way that I had thought in my mind it would be.
So, and when you're having a conversation with this actor that you need to replace, what kind of things did you say or have to pay attention to make sure that the conversation was one that he would be receptive to?
I think you just have to be like honest and sincere as possible, because I mean, you know, they everyone is a person trying to, you know, do their best and stuff, and when you deliver kind of disappointing news, you know, it's important that you acknowledge the humanity, you know, they because they were helping you out, you know, and they're trying to, you know, do their best and stuff. And even though it wasn't maybe the right fit, it's like you have to respect them as a person and like the effort that they put in so far. And if you can acknowledge that, I think it goes a long way, that they know that, you know, you're not being a dick. Like it was a hard decision. You're trying to do the right thing, and you know, fortunately, this is the way it has to go. But
Were you able to preserve the relationships with these people that you had to end up letting go or replace or change out?
yeah, I mean, I believe so. Like, I think if I, you know, call them up or something, you know, we could probably still get like, you know, coffee or something and
Okay.
talk. Like, yeah,
Yeah, because I think some of the challenges I'd say people are afraid of having tough conversations, not only the conversation itself, but the aftermath of the conversation and what that would potentially do to the relationship. So you're
yeah,
telling me that it's possible to be able to have a tough conversation and still preserve the relationship. Depends on how you go about doing it, though.
yeah. I mean, an even tougher situation was one of my friends was doing the sound design, and I, you know, asked him to do that and the music composition. But then when we were going through the trailer, I realized that it wasn't going to be a good fit. And so that was even harder because I'm friends with him, you know, and like you know, I wanted to remain friends and stuff like that. But so after we had the conversation again, like, you know, he was disappointed and stuff like that, but we ended up going to dinner and like, you know, and talking some more and stuff. And then I went he's part of a band, and I went to see like their one of their gigs a few days later. So, you know, so it is possible. I mean, and he was okay with it. I actually think maybe I end up feeling worse about it than him, but because I felt so guilty, like, man, am I throwing him under the bus? Like, this is not what I want to do, but it's like I felt like I needed to do it, you know. So that was tough.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else that you want to talk about with regard to connecting with others, either listening to different viewpoints, resolving conflict through open communication, be willing to ask for help or take advantage of a team's expertise? Wasn't there one conflict where you had to have someone else come in and help resolve it? Was it
Oh,
more that's the script thing or
yeah.
no?
So that wasn't with my crew directly. So actually, the origin of the idea of Ghost in the Gun was partly I was working with another friend at the time, and it was actually his idea about, like, you know, a guy waking up in the desert and then like having a possessed gun. He had different ideas about things, but in any case, like, we had brainstormed together one day, and then after that I came up with the plot, and I, you know, wrote the script and stuff like that. But we had gone our separate ways, like, at one point, so it was kind of like, well, but he was involved in the very initial, you know, process and genesis of the idea, and so it was like, you know, like it was important to give proper credit to him. But the question is sort of how, because I had put in a lot of like most of the effort, you know, in terms of like actually coming up with the plot, writing the script, you know, putting together the production and this and that. So we, I think when we were initially talking, like we just couldn't get on the same page because he felt that he was responsible for a lot of it because like, you know, he was an important part of the like the initial kernel of the idea.
Mm-hmm.
But so what we ended up doing was we ended up having like a third party, not exactly an arbitrator, but like someone who like facilitated the conversation so that, you know, so that we can sort of understand each other better and maybe like empathize and stuff. And so, and I didn't even know that was, you know, an option, but like when I was working at the media center, they, one of the people there made the suggestion, and I was like, okay. So we're both okay with, you know, having a third person like help facilitate our discussion. And so we sat down and we were able to like kind of talk through it and hash it out. And you know, we came to an agreement that you know, I would put his name in the credits for, you know, story development, that sort of thing, and which was fine with me because that reflects, you know, what happened. And then, you know, and then he was satisfied because he did get some credit for it that, you know, was that he was a part of. So, you know, we were able to do that, and I was glad that we were able to make that, have that resolution.
It sounds like though you, at least in your part, you wanted to, you were committed to trying to find a solution. You just didn't want to like say screw you, I don't care what you think kind of thing.
Well, it's not just that, but I think a lot of times it's a fear because it's like my fear might be like that he wants to have control of the film or whatever. And so like, you know, from that fear, I could have been like to try to block him out completely because I, you know, would be afraid that if he was got his foot in the door at all, that like it might, you know, wreck the whole production or something like that. But like, you know, if you can kind of put aside your fears for a second and then figure out like, yes, I do want to like resolve this, and like if both parties are willing to do that, and then like figure out what is it that exactly that they want, it may actually be turn out to be different than what you think that they want, and which was the case, you know, here. It's like just wanting, you know, recognition, credit for being involved in like the genesis of the idea. It's like, to me, it's like, oh yeah, that's fair, that's what happened, that's, I'm fine with giving, you know, credit where credit's due. And you know, and I think he thought that I wasn't willing to acknowledge him at all. And so once we were able to put aside those things, and it would be like, yes, there are things that we agree on in terms of like, you know, acknowledging, you know, credit where credit's due, then we were able to work something out. But like if you're just focused on your fear and what you believe the other person wants, then you may not get to that point. Like if you totally block, you know, cut them out or block them or stonewall them, then you actually don't know what it is that they want when it's something that you actually might be able to agree with.
So part of it sounds like you have to listen to, like truly listen to them to find out what they really want, not what you think they want.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay. Anything else you want to talk about with regard to connecting with others?
Nope, I don't think so.
Then I think we're done for this part anyways. You satisfied with what you shared?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like I'm not as loose as I was last time, but whatever. I'm kind of
Okay.
hungry and